Having trouble hearing in work meetings? Eventually you zone out. You've missed too much to catch up now. Get your confidence back with Nuance Audio.
No worries, I just spoke with the sales office, and they assured me the order has already been processed.
The new invisible hearing solution that's built into your glasses. Nuance Audio glasses help you hear better and reduce background noise, so you can tune into your meetings all day long. Learn more at nuanceaudio.com.
This is the Roger Stone Show, presented by Colonial Metals Group.
A man who's gone through hell, but he's kept going, and he's smart, and he's strong, and people love him. Not everybody, but people love him and respect him. Roger Stone.
Now, here's Roger Stone.
Welcome back. This is Roger Stone, and this is the Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Audio Network. I am joined now by Luke A. Nichter. Luke Nichter is a professor of history, and he is the James H. Kavanaugh Endowed Chair in Presidential Studies at Chapman University. Luke Nichter's area of specialty is the Cold War, the modern presidency, and U.S. political and diplomatic history, with a focus on the 1960s, literally the period from the election of John F. Kennedy to Watergate. He's an extraordinary author, has written a number of books, but his most recent book, The Year That Broke Politics, Collusion and Chaos in the Presidential Election of 1968, I think is now my favorite book on the topic. Prior to this, I thought The Melodrama of 1968, a book written by some British authors, was particularly good. There are several others about the 68 election. I think, frankly, Theodore H. White's book, The Making of the President in 1968, was a little lacking, but this book is a masterpiece. Luke Nichter, I thank you for joining us today on the Roger Stone Show.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
You are a very serious historian. I have read most of your books. I think that perhaps your greatest achievement is parsing through all of the presidential tapes of President Nixon. In fact, you're an expert on the secret White House recordings of presidents from Franklin Roosevelt all the way through Richard Nixon. It's amazing when I read John Dean's book, which was supposed to be a compendium of all of the Watergate-related tapes, several of the tapes in which he himself, I think, demonstrated his own role in Watergate, seem to be missing from that particular volume. We won't necessarily go there today, but I do want to ask you, before we move on to a very excellent piece you wrote for the Wall Street Journal about how the Ukraine war would not have surprised President Richard Nixon. Your book on the 68 election addresses the question that has been raised by a number of authors, including Lawrence O'Donnell and others, who allege that at the end of the 1968 campaign, when President Lyndon Johnson declared a bombing halt in Vietnam, that agents of Richard Nixon, candidate for president, used a go-between to contact the South Vietnamese to tell them not to go to peace talks because it was believed that such talks might boost the election prospects of Vice President Hubert Humphrey. You examined this extensively, and you came to a different conclusion. Could you talk to us about that?
Yeah, I'd be delighted to. This is a story that's been on the public record since early 1969. It's really had new life in recent years, because after Donald Trump won the presidency in 2016, and those allegations of Russian collusion started almost immediately, based on my memory, this earlier episode, back in 1968, the idea that Richard Nixon might have won the White House by colluding with a foreign power, that being President Nguyen Van Thieu of South Vietnam, fast forward to 2016, people all of a sudden rediscovered this old episode from 1968, because in 2016, the idea was, if you want to know how Trump might have done it with Putin and Russia, look back to how Nixon did it. And I didn't do anything special, to be honest. Everyone's repeated the story as if it's gospel truth. And I grew up, believing that it was either true or mostly true. And all I did was go back and check the sources in the archives, which actually very, very few people do. And that, I think, on top of the fact that, my background is blue collar. I grew up in Northwest Ohio. And I don't have any elite institutions or background to defend. So I went at this, I think, without blinders, without preconceived ideas. And at the very end of it, what I added up, looking at all the evidence, is it doesn't prove much of anything. It doesn't prove that Richard Nixon colluded or did anything other than win in 1968. Just as we learned with Donald Trump after 2016, I think all those allegations evaporated away the same way.
I examined much of the same evidence, not to the detail that you did. I came up with a similar conclusion. The most important thing I, of course, realized was that there were no concessions from the North Vietnamese. So this bombing halt was based on exactly what, other than perhaps an effort to boost Vice President Hubert Humphrey. I cover this in my book, The Tricky Dick, The Rise and Fall and Rise of Richard M. Nixon. But the 1968 election is fascinating. People don't recognize that this was a three-way race. So Richard Nixon, who up until recently I think would be the man who had staged the greatest single comeback in American political history, had to run with Hubert Humphrey running to his left, but also George Wallace, governor of Alabama, running to his right. And in essence had to run between the raindrops. One of the most outrageous attacks on Nixon continues to be his employment of the so-called Southern strategy. When you look at his civil rights record, however, that doesn't hold up either. It was Richard Nixon who desegregated the public schools. They were overwhelmingly still segregated when he became president under the leadership of Daniel Patrick Moynihan and George Shultz. And others. They were desegregated overwhelmingly by the time he left office, without violence, without bloodshed. It was Nixon who gave us affirmative action. It was Nixon who gave us the the Office of Minority Business Enterprise. Nixon who championed black capitalism. Nixon who quadrupled the funding for civil rights enforcement in the U.S. Justice Department during his presidency. And as you well know, Luke, it was Nixon who helped round up the votes necessary for the passage of the 1958 Civil Rights Act, which was essentially being quarterbacked by Lyndon Johnson, who never signed the Southern Manifesto, even though there's substantial evidence that he wrote it, planning a 1960 campaign for Congress. Yet another misnomer. I also have to say that your book on Henry Cabot Lodge, The Last Brahmin, is an extraordinary book. The full title of that, folks, The Last Brahmin, Henry Cabot Lodge Jr. and the Making of the Cold War. It's published by the Yale University Press. I really enjoyed this, particularly because his brother, John Davis Lodge, congressman from Connecticut, governor of Connecticut, ambassador to Spain under Dwight Eisenhower, ambassador to Argentina under Richard Nixon, ambassador to Switzerland under Ronald Reagan, was my political mentor. You do a great service. This book was really terrific. It is a shame that people don't know more about Lodge. He really, in many ways, U.S. Senator from Massachusetts, later ambassador to the UN. In a way, he sacrificed his own career. He was so busy electing Dwight Eisenhower that he lost re-election in 1952 to none other than John F. Kennedy. This is a tremendous achievement, I must tell you.
Well, I appreciate that, and of course, your listeners know, your audience. You're an intimidating interviewer because you know an awful lot of history, and only one of us has a tattoo of Richard Nixon, of course. But I think that, there's nothing there that you said I can possibly disagree with. I think I would add just one point, which is, we know that Americans love their history, and you look at Americans who take family vacations to see the Smithsonian or to walk our Civil War battlefields. or to visit our national parks from coast to coast. What Americans don't like often is the narrators of our history, who are often on one side politically and don't represent, the breadth of political views of our nation. And as I said earlier, given my own background, I try to write about stories that have been overlooked. Oftentimes, especially those right of center, don't have examples from history they can relate to, don't have examples from history that they can use to illuminate their understanding of the present and the policy discussions going on. And so what that means is one-sidedness of history means an awful lot of things go overlooked. And that's the sort of thing that I'm trying to correct in my career.
One of the most important things you do in your biography of Lodge before we leave this is debunking this claim that Lodge was a lazy campaigner and that is what cost Richard Nixon a skin-tight election. That was not true. You document that in your book. It was a bum rap. The choice of Lodge, which I think was heavily affected by President Eisenhower, was meant to accentuate the experience of the Nixon-Lodge ticket. He was acceptable to everyone in the party. And I think you debunked yet another falsehood that kind of bumps around American politics. Let's talk when we come back about this incredible piece that you wrote for the Wall Street Journal, where you found a declassified 1994 letter that President Nixon wrote to President Bill Clinton that seems to have foreshadowed the current conflict between Ukraine and Russia. This is of great interest to me. I worked very hard in the closing days of Nixon's life to get him a meeting with President Bill Clinton. The Bushes had never really treated President Nixon appropriately, particularly given the vital role that Nixon had played in George H.W. Bush's political survival after he lost not one, but 2 U.S. Senate races in Texas. But I did have a feeling that if Presidents Nixon and Clinton ever got together, that they would hit it off. They had the shared experience of having lost races for governor but come back to win the presidency. They both came from very humble backgrounds, and they were both the comeback kids in their own way. So when we return, we will talk to Luke Nichter, historian, distinguished historian, and author, about this incredible piece in the Wall Street Journal in which, if you read it, folks, you see that Nixon was a very long-range thinker, to say the least. We'll be right back with the Roger Stone Show here with Luke Nichter, historian and acclaimed author. Please, folks, whatever you do, don't touch that dial.
5 immersive worlds, 1 amazing theme park. Get ready to explore the all-new Universal Epic Universe, featuring the wizarding world of Harry Potter, Ministry of Magic, Super Nintendo World, How to Train Your Dragon Isle of Berk, and Dark Universe. Epic Universe, now open at Universal Orlando Resort. Our universe will never be the same. Tickets and packages on sale now at universalorlando.com.
Oh my God, it's the coolest thing ever. Hey guys, have you heard of Goldbelly? Well, check this out. It's this amazing site where they ship the most iconic, famous foods from restaurants across the country, anywhere nationwide. I've never found a more perfect gift than food. They ship Chicago deep dish pizza, New York bagels, Maine lobster rolls, and even Ina Garten's famous cakes. Seriously. So if you're looking for a gift for the food lover in your life, head to goldbelly.com and get 20% off your first order with promo code GIFT.
This episode is brought to you by Hulu, presenting Paradise. Paradise is Hulu's critically acclaimed addictive drama series, starring Sterling K. Brown, Julianne Nicholson, and James Marsden. The Daily Beast calls Paradise your next TV obsession, and the New York Times says it's exhilarating in all the right ways. Paradise is for your Emmy consideration in all categories, including Outstanding Drama Series. For more information, visit fyc.hulu.com.
Build professional skills this semester with Adobe Creative Cloud and create standout work both in and out of the classroom. Save big on professional creativity tools. Students get 65% off Adobe Creative Cloud, including Photoshop, Illustrator, Premiere Pro, Acrobat Pro, and 20+ creative apps. No matter what project you're working on, Adobe Creative Cloud apps can help you take it to the next level. Visit adobe.com/student to learn more.
Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, George W. Bush, and Donald Trump.
They went after a guy named Roger Stone, who's sitting in the office. And I'll say this in front of Roger, he's no baby. And right now, he's cleaner than anybody in this place. No, they treated him very unfairly.
All of these presidents relied on one man to secure their seat in the Oval Office. That man is Roger Stone.
Roger Stone.
This is the Roger Stone Show, presented by Colonial Metals Group. Now, here's Roger Stone.
And we're back. We're talking to Professor Luke Nichter, who is a professor of history and the James H. Kavanaugh Endowed Chairholder at the Presidential Studies at Chapman University. He is an acclaimed author of a number of books. I think I've read every one of them. I'm an admirer. I admit that right up front. You had an incredible piece in the Wall Street Journal back in July of last year when Bill Clinton eulogized Richard Nixon on April 27th, 1994. I was there, by the way, for the... he spoke of the former president's wise counsel, especially with regard to Russia. He said, based on our last conversation, and the letter he wrote me just a month ago, he referred to that wise counsel. For nearly 30 years, the content of that letter remained a secret. You were able to get it declassified. You can now tell us what was in the letter and why it gives us a much greater understanding of Nixon's worldview and how he foresaw exactly what is going on today in this struggle between Ukraine and Russia.
Well, former President Nixon was known for writing fascinating letters. For most presidents, even a 1 or a 2-page single-spaced memo is a long letter, and Nixon would write 5, 7, 8 pages. And what's also striking is that he offered this unsolicited advice, not just to Republicans, but to Democrats too, because I think he really felt that was the best for the country. And in this case, I'd been after, I'd always heard that former President Nixon and President Clinton struck up a friendship, a camaraderie of sorts, especially as the young Clinton wanted Nixon's advice on especially Russia and China in his first year or two of office. Of course, Nixon dies in the spring of '94. And so I'd been after their correspondence, trying to get it declassified by the National Archives for about 15 years, and didn't really get much of interest. And then all of a sudden, I was sitting in a hotel room in Baltimore about a week before that piece appeared in the Wall Street Journal. And the Clinton Library in Little Rock says, we missed one of the letters in our earlier search in response to your request, and here it is. And I opened it up, and it was just this tremendous letter written, as you say, just before, about a month before Nixon died in 1994. He'd returned from a long trip to Russia and to Ukraine. And when you read it, you can't help but read it and think he not only understood the tensions in that part of the world that we see today, but the rise of Vladimir Putin, the turn of Russian leaders toward a more isolationist or nationalist approach. And I think his letter served as a real warning, not just one that was ignored back then, but one that I hope that we heed today.
I urge folks to read it. It was published by the Wall Street Journal on July 21st, 2023. One of the things that you have done, I think you can still find this at nixontapes.org, along with the historian Douglas Brinkley, who wrote 2 volumes on the Nixon tapes. The first one, Nixon, 1971, 1972, and then a sequel volume, 1973. Listening to and parsing the tapes has to be, or reading just reading the transcripts has to be an arduous process. Now, so-called historians like, Stanley Cutler, have actually changed the order of some of these tapes to make John Dean, the man who conceived of, pushed, and lied about the Watergate break-in for 19 straight months. But you have been scrupulously, I think, unbiased in these volumes. That has to have been an enormous undertaking for you and for Douglas Brinkley.
Well, it is, and I hate to say it, but in this labor of love, I even lost a little bit of hearing in my right ear, listening to all these tapes. But I think it also goes to show you that an awful lot, and this does not make me popular at academic conferences to say this, but an awful lot that passes for history is actually not rigorously researched. Instead, we see it's often based on preconceived ideas or political commitments. And, people don't do rigorous research, or they stop right when they think they found something that proves the point they try to make. And I take a different approach, not just in these Nixon tapes books, but in all my books, which is, rigorous research. And, what's more important for the reader, to hear what I have to say or to hear what a president said on a tape? So I feel like it's pretty easy to sit back and let my reader, actually hear or read what the president actually said. I feel like, no interference between the two is necessary.
These are extraordinary accomplishments. You have worked very hard filing over 2,000 Freedom of Information Act requests for the purpose of opening historically important records to public access, a work that has been officially endorsed by the American Historical Association. You have worked very hard, really, just to uncover the facts. And for that, I salute you. Look, I'm an unabashed Nixon fan. Everybody knows that. He got us a strategic arms limitation agreement with the Soviets, opened the door to China when China had no technology, was a backwards agrarian society, ended the war on Vietnam on a faster timetable than that desired by the Pentagon, gave us the 18-year-old vote, did away with the military draft, launched the war on cancer, desegregated the public schools, and made for a safer, more secure world. You're not an opinion journalist, you're a historian, but I think all of your books prove these points, so I want to thank you again for joining us today on The Roger Stone Show. And Luke, what is your next book?
I have a contract now to write something near and dear to your heart, which is a book on LBJ White House years. So the whole presidency, which puts me, it's going to be a big book. And so now I'm in direct competition with Robert Caro to see who can finish first. I probably won't get as many words as he does, but I'm hoping to finish the history of the 1960s. I've done now in 3 volumes because I want to move on to the 1970s, which, as you know, has been so poorly done. But Nixon, Watergate, the Church Committee, there's so many important subjects that deserve rigorous research.
Well, I think you're going to have very little, you're not going to have a hard time beating Mr. Caro. He manages to write multi-volumes about Lyndon Baines Johnson, but never once mentions Billy Sol Estes and the Billy Sol Estes scandal. How is that even possible? All right, Luke Nichter, thank you again for joining us today on The Roger Stone Show.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Coming up strong, he's following through. Nixon now, Nixon now.